Welcome to Community Voices with your host, Tarence Lauchie. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Now, into the program.
Greetings, this is Tarence Lauchie, and you are tuned into another edition of Community Voices on 91.9 FM, The People's Choice. It's always an exciting privilege and an opportunity for me to interview guests here and around the community of the Grand Rapids area and to keep you in the know of what's happening in our city and the surrounding areas. Today, I'm blessed and fortunate to have in the studio someone who can talk to us a little bit about the news, sports, weather, you name it. Jamal Spencer, who works with WZZM.
Yep.
Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'll be honest, I don't get a lot of opportunity to do radio, and I'm so excited to see broadcasts from a different point of view, you know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, when the station manager let me know that I would be interviewing somebody in television, I'm going, we're in radio, but that's in television. It's like two worlds collide.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it feels like.
Listen, I'm privileged to be able to do this. I do it as a volunteer, and I love it. I don't necessarily like to hear my voice on the radio, but I love to get information out, and I love to inspire people through real lived experiences, real life happenings. So we'll get a chance to do that. If you're just tuning in, or if you're listening in your car or at work or something, why don't you text somebody, call somebody, let them know that we are on the air on Community Voices with Tarence Lauchie on 91.9 FM, The People's Choice. Our guest, Mr. Jamal Spencer. Tell us a little bit about your journey to WZZM, the Grand Rapids area, and what you do.
It's funny off the, before we started, you and I were kind of talking about how strong God is and how there's a plan even if you don't see that plan. Mm-hmm. As a native Detroiter, I grew up on the west side of Detroit.
Right, we talked about that.
Some people think that's the best side, but there seems to be a dispute about that.
No, there's the west side, and then there's the best side.
Fair enough. Okay. Fair enough.
Well, we have that in common, Detroiters.
Absolutely. I went to Michigan State University.
And Spartans.
Yep, we're both Spartans as well.
Go Green.
Studied journalism there, a really great journalism program.
I was a communications major in the same college.
Yep, the Com-Arch School is wonderful. And I always wanted to play sports. And then I got to a point where
that's where you leave me right there.
I think every single person, if it's little league or whatever, anyone who ever plays sports, even if it's just once, there comes a chance when you will play your final game.
Exactly.
So for all of us, the thought, what comes next, it could be elementary school,
right.
It could be high school,
first and last.
You know what I'm saying? Yep. So for me, it was high school where I thought, man, I am not good enough. Or as my father says, there's a comedian who jokes that I would not want to be a member of any club who would have me as a member. As an athlete, any school who was recruiting me, I thought, no thanks.
What sport was it?
I played baseball, basketball, and soccer.
Okay.
But for basketball, I'm a 6-foot power forward, so there's not a big market for that.
Okay.
And baseball was my best sport.
Right.
But
now, soccer, of course, is not a Detroit neighborhood pastime.
At all.
There had to be some international exposure there.
And it was because my mother did not want her son to play football because she thought I would get hurt. So I played soccer instead.
Smart mom. Even though it's called football in other countries.
I was going to say, that was my way of getting around it, you know? So I played sports and I loved it and I had a passion for it. And when I couldn't play anymore, I wanted to talk about it in some capacity. Mm-hmm. I was not great with numbers, so I couldn't be an agent. Math was out of the equation. So I thought,
you want to be a coach or a trainer?
Nope. No? I thought about these different avenues. I thought, man, I would love to tell these athletes stories, and I would love to be able to shed light on the positive things that they do, both on and off the court or on and off the field. And so I'm like, journalism is it. So this was, when I was a junior in high school,
awesome.
Or senior in high school, I knew I want to be a journalist, and I was fortunate enough. Growing up in Detroit, there was a black man on WDIV named Emery King, and there was a black anchor on Fox 2 named Huel Perkins.
I remember Huel Perkins.
And you get to see a little bit of representation. And then I would turn on SportsCenter on ESPN, and there was a man named Stuart Scott. Mm-hmm. And so I get to see.
Stuart Scott had the voice.
Yes. And what Stuart Scott taught me was he was unapologetically black.
Right.
He didn't feel the need to put on a false air or present himself in a different light.
Sure.
Stuart Scott on TV was the same Stuart Scott you're going to see at the barbershop. Mm-hmm. And I love that because that let me know there are spaces for you to be yourself in this world.
Absolutely.
And if I want to be on TV, I don't have to change who I am to appease anyone else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I tell people how much representation really matters, because if you don't see it, it's hard for you to really believe that you can achieve something. You can have a dream and a goal.
Sure.
But if there's no person that you can point to and say, oh, yeah, so-and-so does that, it's kind of hard to see yourself in it.
Yeah, you need to see it in order to be it.
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, to be able to see Huel Perkins and Emery King and Stuart Scott led me to believe that a career in television was possible. So I go to Michigan State, study up, and then, was fortunate enough to get a job in Lansing. Mm-hmm. And then I got a job. I was still in school when Fox Sports Detroit offered me a sideline reporting job. Mm-hmm. And I was 16 credits or 12 credits shy of graduation. Told my mom, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm going to have to drop out for a little bit. This is the job you go to school for.
Sure.
She understood, and the rest was history.
Well, that was a blessing, and it happened. And I can't say prematurely because, we walk in faith. We believe that our steps are ordered by God. Mm-hmm. He obviously orchestrated you being here, even in the Grand Rapids area. And that story is a success story to come through the statistical odds of being a Detroiter and living whether east side or west side, black men in America.
Yep.
But then journalism. It's obvious that if you didn't go the sports route, that you've got a vocabulary and you also have a speaking voice. Tell us a little bit about how you landed in Grand Rapids with WZZM.
I was working in Fargo, North Dakota, because as they say in my profession, you got to go where the work is. And so in 2011, I had moved to Fargo, packed up everything I owned in a Pontiac G6, hopped on I-94 and just drove west until it got flat.
Right. You couldn't go any
further. So I'm working in Fargo, and a job opened up in Grand Rapids for a sports anchor at the Fox affiliate here, WXMI Channel 17. Mm-hmm. And I applied for that job, and I wanted it because at the time, my oldest sister lived here in Grand Rapids. She was a teacher. And my family was still in Detroit, and I wanted to get back to Michigan in the worst way.
Yeah.
And I applied for this job.
You didn't like North Dakota?
I know. It's funny you say that. Being a Michigander, you think you know what cold is until you get up there.
That's what they tell me.
It's colder than you ever thought it would be. So
I lived in the UP.
Oh, my God. Yeah, you get it. I mean,
get it.
Fargo is pretty much parallel with the Upper Peninsula.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's cold up there, man. The wind chill is no joke. So I was ready to get back. And I applied for this job at Fox 17, and I was so excited because in my mind, I'm the perfect candidate. I'm from Michigan.
Right.
I've been doing this job for a couple of years. I want to be here, and I did not get that opportunity.
Wow.
I did not get that job, and I was disappointed. I was heartbroken, and I thought, if it's never going to happen. I'm never going to be able to move back home. I'm going to have to take another job in Arizona or something.
Go from cold to hot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have to find a different climate.
From the refrigerator to the microwave.
and yet. A former camera person who used to work at WZZM was working at the CBS affiliate in Minneapolis, WCCO. We had crossed paths a few times.
Yeah.
And that person said, Jamal, I know you're trying to get back home. WZZM has 2 sports jobs open. They have the sports director job and the weekend sports anchor job. If you let me know when you apply, I can make sure your resume gets in proper hands. And I said, I really appreciate that. His name is Aaron Goodyear. So I applied for the job. I told Aaron when I applied. Aaron reached out to his person at WZZM, and that person walked into the news director's office, put my resume at the top of the pile, and said, you need to look at this.
Wow.
And that news director looked at it, called me that week, said schedule an interview, and bam, I moved to Grand Rapids in November 2014. So,
yeah, well, I'm glad you made it here. There's no coincidences, but there's probably a young man just like you and I were back in our days, me in the 1900s, you in the 2000s, of course, looking at somebody on television, looking at an anchor, looking at somebody. Tavis Smiley was my role model. He was the guy. Yep. And then there was also,
that voice.
I know, and with radio, believe it or not, it was Donnie Simpson. I don't know if you're familiar with Donnie the Love Bug Simpson.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we used to listen to him at night. He would come on after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and start out with the Earth, Wind, and Fire song. Ooh. And so, I have since traded my, secular music for gospel. But I can remember being inspired listening to black men enunciate words, black men talk about relevant things that were happening to inform the community, but then also having compassion to where you can sense and feel that something's not right or something bad happened or something good is going on. You could hear it in the tone or the inflection of their voices. Let's talk a little bit about that because I think we share a common thread with the desire to use that gift that you have coupled with God. Some people say it's serendipity, but God orchestrating your steps to get you to where you are. If there's a young man listening or a young girl that wants to get into media, wants to go into journalism, wants to get into broadcasting, wants to get production. I mean, you've had an opportunity to touch all of those things.
Yep.
Talk to them about that.
Growing up, everybody wanted to be a musician. My friends in Detroit, and obviously,
because the Motown.
Yes, Motown
He
has
was a
a
musician or
rich
athlete?
history. Yes,
Yep.
you wanted to play sports or sing, dance, act. There was something about the arts that called to a lot of people in Detroit. And I had a baseball coach that told me, your voice, you sound like smooth jazz.
Yes,
B98.7. He told me I had one of those voices, and I thought, I don't know. But when he jokingly said it, I thought about what you just said.
Sure.
It'd be nice to use that in a different avenue as opposed to being a late night DJ or something. How can I inform people with this gift? Because this is not mine. This isn't me.
Mm-hmm.
This is God's work here. And so I said, okay. And then when I moved here, I'm thankful because the elders in Muskegon, the elders in Grand Rapids, when they would see me at the grocery store, they would thank me. And this is my first 2 to 3 months here. I hadn't done anything in my mind.
Wow.
And they said, you don't know what you're doing yet, but you'll figure it out later. And I understand now, because what they meant was the representation you and I talk about is it means so much to turn on the local television to see a brother who's doing something positive in our community or for our community or representing us in a positive light. And that resonated so strongly with me because it wasn't coming from people my age. It was coming from people who'd seen some things and had done some things and had lived.
Well, I noticed you referred to them as elders.
Absolutely. And it meant so much for them to say, your representation here matters. And so to be able to, like you said, to talk about the news, to talk statistics, to be able to say this is what happens in sports or news or entertainment and these various fields, to be that face of representation is very important to me, and I take it seriously, which is why when students email me or reach out to me in any capacity, I love answering questions because I remember what that was like. I remember what it's like to sit in that seat and the future's in front of you, but you don't know how to get there.
Sure.
Like you have a vision and a goal, but you don't know how to get there. You don't know who you can reach out to for help, who can give you advice. I love being that sounding board because if I'm doing it, I want to tell everybody else. And the way my mom explained it is, so often we hear these metaphors of, the first person through the door, the first person through the window. And it's not just enough to kick in the door.
Yeah.
Pull somebody with you.
That's right.
And so
or at least leave it open so somebody else can get
leave,
through.
leave it open so the rest of people can follow your path.
Yeah,
And I am a firm believer in
and that's
that.
code for opportunity. That's code for influence. That's code for paying it forward. You mentioned that a little bit as well. I think about your journey, the Michigan State University experience, the North Dakota experience, the Grand Rapids experience, the Detroit experience in and of itself. What stands out most to you as the highest moment for you? And then what was the most challenging moment in getting to where you are?
Very interesting question. I went to community college after my senior year of high school because I didn't quite have the grades to go to college. I had the proper ACT score. My GPA was low. Excuse me. I wasn't a serious student for my first 2 years of high school. And so that year of community college, I got friends going to different universities all around the country and telling me their stories about the quad and the campus and the CAF and
the Greeks. And
I'm saying, I want to pledge this, and I'm sitting in my parents' kitchen. And so I'm really down on myself, but I'm asking myself, do I really want this? Do I really want to try to make it in this career? Because there are different avenues I can go to, but do I really want to go to school? And I got too serious. I ended up getting a 3.6 at community college. And I got my grades together, transferred to Michigan State. And for me, that was a launching pad of growing up. Okay, I can do this. I can be an adult. I can make proper decisions. I can be serious about my business because I can't get to where I want to get, if I'm only given 50% effort. And so that was just getting to Michigan State was a high point for me because while that was a goal, doesn't mean it's automatic.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Everybody doesn't make it.
And for my career, once I got into this business, it took off so much faster than I could have imagined because of opportunities. I had internships. I've had 3 internships in my life, and every one of those resulted in a job.
Nice.
And so while that is part luck because of opportunity, it's also hard work put me in that position. But when I got to WZZM, we were covering a Michigan State football game in 2015, and we were live outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan Stadium. And the game is happening as I'm on live television. And I was given a score. I was given an update. Hey, Jamal, Michigan won the game 23-21. Tell the people, blah, blah, blah. And as I'm doing that, Michigan State blocks a punt and returns it for a touchdown and wins the game 27-23.
Wow.
So now I'm on live TV. Excuse me. Given the wrong information.
So you're calling the game when it actually was an upset, turned over.
I'm the face of this blunder because someone in my ear gave me false information, but I didn't throw that person under the bus.
Right.
I'm the boss. I take responsibility for what just
Absolutely.
happened. this was my fault. And the hate mail, the vitriol, there was some racial backlash involved in there. Wow. People tell me, you're not going to get fired because you're black, and they don't want to fire minorities. I'm telling you, it got nasty.
That was like a backslap, a backhand slap.
It was, and that was the lowest point for me. But
wow, I'm sure.
Rebounding
it was
from
the lowest and the highest at the same time, because just to cover the Michigan State University U of M game, and then you call the game, and then it turns out to be something else, similar to when I want to say it was Steve Harvey or somebody they called the Universe pageant.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, the Miss Universe pageant.
Got it wrong.
A different person.
It happened at the Oscars with Warren Beatty when he read the wrong person got the Oscar. Same thing.
Yeah,
and that was awful. A couple years later, Fair State wins the national championship in football. They get honored at the White House. My television station decides to send me and a photographer to the White House. We are the only West Michigan media to cover this event. And there's people on this team who saw themselves as football players and maybe not realizing the scope of their abilities. Mm-hmm. Man, you can go to the White House. You can be seen. Mm-hmm. You're a role model. And interviewing them at the White House, and I'm sitting in the press room at the White House editing my story. I did a live shot outside the White House, and I'm standing there thinking, man, how far we've come. Mm-hmm. And that's a broad we. That's not just me. I am so blessed to be able to tell these stories, to be in these spaces, to be able to be in these spaces. And there are times in which we would not be able to be where we are and have the jobs that we have and have the opportunities that we have. And so that moment of being at the White House, and that was just a couple months ago. That was in June of this year.
Well, congratulations is still in order.
Thank you. I just remember thinking, man, this is wonderful. This is wonderful.
Well, to get to the White House in journalism as a black man, you had to take some bumps and scrapes and bruises, but you also have to do a lot of hard work, and you have to represent a lot of people. Now, unfortunately, whenever we are, quote unquote, a minority in a room, we have a tendency to have to represent the masses or the majority. Well, I don't know how fair that is. It's definitely not equal opportunity. But let's talk a little bit about blacks in sports and media, because that's the field that you've kind of honed in on. What are some of the challenges in those areas, and how could a young person who might be interested begin to penetrate that veil?
I think the common thread that I found was that, and this is, I guess, a blessing and a curse. I never played football because my mom wouldn't let me. But there's a lot of people who saw me talking about football on television and assumed that I played.
That you were a former football player.
So you're a big black man. You must have played football. And that's the undertone of that comment.
Right.
And so it always rubbed me the wrong way. But then I chose to think of the positive in that. Maybe I'm talking about something so well that they think I must have firsthand knowledge of it. I have studied my craft so well that they assume you must have played because you know the sport so well. Mm-hmm. And I started to look at it from that lens, and it didn't bother me so much. But being a black man in media, when I say you have to go where the work is, as a young, even it could be radio, it could be TV, these jobs will take you all over the country. Mm-hmm. But they'll take you a place where maybe a lot of us don't go. And so I was the first black anchor in the history of the state of North Dakota, and that was in 2011.
Wow. And so, we were talking about the fact that it was in the 2000s and you're still making black history.
Thank you. I'm not Jackie Robinson in the 40s. You know what I'm saying? Right. In 2011, first black anchor in the history of the state, and I have no problem telling this story because it's 100% true. My second weekend in Fargo, I'd been there exactly 13 days. I've been on television a few times as a weekend sports anchor, and a gentleman looks at me in the grocery store. And an older white gentleman's kind of looking me up and down as if he knows me from somewhere, but he can't quite place it. And he shakes his finger and he goes, "That's right. You're that colored guy from the news, aren't you?"
Colored guy.
And he said it to my face with zero malice in his heart, as if he thought that this was an acceptable way to greet someone.
Sure, because that was their point of reference.
Exactly. And in that moment, I realized I now have two choices in how I react to this, obviously, because like you just said, we represent all of us, which is not fair.
Yeah, whether we want to or not.
Exactly. And now I can't lash out because then we're all violent or we're all angry or, you know. So I thanked them. I said, thank you for watching, because I guess if you recognize me, you must be watching. So thank you for watching. And I went about my way. But I never forgot it, because there are pockets of people in this world who don't know that that's ignorance. You know, they don't know what
offensive,
that. Yep. So if you're going to be a black man or black woman, a black person in these spaces, you will run into people who your very presence offends them, or your very presence is difficult for them to understand because they are not used to seeing it. But that doesn't mean that you should shine any less. It doesn't mean that you should diminish your skills and your voice to appease other people. So I think that lesson is you have to be yourself unapologetically at all times, and the chips will fall where they may.
Yeah, it's good to hear this coming from where you stand in the whole arena of sports and media, because we could be talking to athletes, either of us interviewing athletes about their moral values, about their moral failures, about their challenges of having to be so much to so many different people. But you have another angle. You have a different perspective, which I think is a gift. And it's also, I look at it as God's way of leveling the playing field. Because if you're going to tell the news, if you're going to report the lives and the lifestyle of people who look like you, you're going to tell the truth.
Absolutely.
And you'll give it a perspective that people can relate to, as opposed to somebody else's angle. And there's so many bloopers out there of people in news. Tell me a blooper that you had.
Oh my gosh!
Excuse me.
There's I want to say one that's rated PG.
Okay.
This
is a Christian station. You do know that, Jamal.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. I was a very young journalist, and I'm on television for not the first time, but this is very early in my career, my first couple of months, and I want to do such a good job.
Right.
Putting so much pressure on myself. And I'm sitting at the anchor desk on what I believe to either be Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend. I think it was Memorial Day weekend.
Okay.
Because my boss had taken the holiday off. And I'm doing a golf highlight on the Deutsche Bank Classic.
Okay.
The word I said, though, was not Deutsch. And so I read it wrong, and I immediately know that I've messed up. And I have referred instead to a feminine hygiene product.
Oh God!
And the news anchor to my left is losing it on live television. Starting to laugh, and I am not mature enough to handle that.
Because when they start laughing,
I'm laughing.
Or trying to hold the laugh in.
So for the next 6 years, I think it was, on Memorial Day weekend, I would get a text about that Deutsche Bank Classic. And please make sure you're pronouncing that word correctly. But that was a blooper for me. And I think the important thing about bloopers is, number one, you will survive.
Absolutely.
It might not feel like it in the moment. It might be the most embarrassing thing you have ever encountered, and you might be very low. And I understand that feeling. The sun will rise tomorrow.
Right.
You're going to have breath in your lungs again. We're going to continue to move forward.
And black men do blush.
Absolutely.
So you can turn red.
Absolutely.
As dark as we are, we can be shamed.
Yes.
It's exciting to be able to talk to somebody who's had so much life already, so much life. Tell us a little bit about the personal side. I understand that you are married. You have a child.
Yep.
All right.
I talking about God's will a lot.
And your wife is in media.
Absolutely. My wife is a news producer at WZZM. So
awesome.
When we talk about being faces in the room, I think it's not enough, in my opinion, for us to be anchors and be on television and have representation in that way. We want to make sure there's representation at the seats at the tables.
Absolutely.
Where the conversations are being held.
I often say that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's exactly right. That's a great way of putting it. I love that.
Yeah.
And that's me and my wife. She is a news producer, and she's the one who sits at the table to say, I don't think that's a good idea. You guys might be overlooking this, and here's why. Let me give you a different perspective.
Some sensitivity.
I have said this jokingly, but you know that it's true. When I went to Michigan State as a single man, I wanted to live on a part of campus where there were a lot of black people. I think the majority of black people lived in Hubbard or Brody.
South Campus or Brody Hall.
Yep. Yeah. So I wanted to live there, and God put me in West Circle, which is over by the Union, which just so happened to be 98% white.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, well, this isn't where I want to be. But the good Lord saw fit to put me directly next to two all-girl dorms.
Right.
And so
one was Bryan Hall and Gilchrist.
Gilchrist. Yakeley was there too.
Gilchrist. Yep.
Yeah. And I met my wife in Yakeley Hall.
So God was orchestrating your steps.
Yep. God was 100% orchestrating my steps in His Word. And so I met my wife at Michigan State, and we were married in Detroit, over on the east side at St. Paul AME Church.
Oh, yeah.
And we've gone through so much together, because she moved to Fargo when we were dating. And my dad was like, "Oh, she's the one.
Oh, wow.
She's gonna pack up and move to
go to North Dakota.
She's the one." So
she's like, "I'll follow you anywhere."
Yep, yeah. And she meant it. And so she moved to Fargo with me. We moved back home together. We got engaged here in Grand Rapids. We got engaged on the steps where we had our first kiss at Yakeley Hall.
Michigan State?
Yep, that's where I popped the question at Michigan State.
We got married at the University Methodist Church.
Oh, really?
Just off of Trowbridge.
I love it.
So all these romance stories about Michigan State University from Detroit kids.
Yep, it's real.
Yeah,
it's real.
Yeah.
And so we
loving basketball ain't got nothing on that. all these movies, these John Singleton and Tyler Perry movies, they got nothing on the real life.
Real deal. We got married. We just had a son in 2021. He's 2
years old.
And being a father gives me a different perspective, because I wasn't someone who grew up, without my parents. My parents have been married for 40. Oh my goodness, they've been married since 1981.
Awesome example.
I grew up in a household full of love, and I saw firsthand what being a father means and what impact that has. When I was a kid, I said I wanted to have 2 jobs. You ask little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And someone say, I want to be a basketball player.
Sure.
I said I want to be a police and a daddy.
There you go.
Because I thought, man, those seem to be 2 great jobs.
Or one cancels out the other.
Yeah, right? Yeah, for sure. So I
moved
away from wanting to be in law enforcement, but
right.
my dad was my idol. And I love my father so much that in my eyes, I wanted to be like that man. And so having a son of my own, looking at the lessons I learned from my father, it makes me want to be.
Gives you an opportunity.
Man, it's so great.
Is he in media as well, or
he's not? He could have been. He really could have been. Yeah. But my father worked for HUD for 35 years.
State or federal?
Federal. Worked downtown in the McNamara Building in downtown Detroit. Yeah. And my dad would often tell me his job involved deciding what funds go to which communities for what purpose.
Sure.
So a community would come and say, hey, we need $3 million grant so we can build X, Y, and Z. And he would love to take me to a city of Flint or Muskegon. You see that mini mall right there? That's my building. Wow. So that's where my dad would always say, that's what we're doing. So
that's another spot for me. I've done doctoral research in the impact of fatherlessness on personal success for African American males in particular. And just your testimony alone of your dad being a role model for you inspires. And then now you want to be a role model for your son. How do you do that? How does this happen, especially in the day and time that we live in?
I felt guilty growing up with a father because so many of my friends didn't. Yeah. So many of my friends grew up in divorced families. And I mean, as long as a child gets love, I'm not one to judge whether or not the parents are together or who's in the house, whatever, as long as the child gets love. But growing up with a father just felt like, I don't know, I felt rare, for my group of people. And so
you were,
so I didn't like talking about it as a kid because I didn't want to brag. I remember telling one of my best friends, I go, hey, do you do this with your dad? And his response was, my dad lives in Baltimore.
Wow.
But he didn't say it with malice. It was just this cold fact. My dad lives in Baltimore. And I remember just shrinking. So but on the positive side for me, getting so many of these lessons and watching my dad play softball or watching my dad, introduce himself to people, and everywhere we go, wherever we went, it seemed like people knew Steven Spencer. and I just, I wanted to be like him so bad. And now that I have a son, catching myself doing some of the same things my dad did, and talking to other fathers, and every father says the same thing. They go, man, it's hard, but isn't it the best?
Well, believe it or not, he's watching you. Yeah. He's watching you now. In fact, if he's listening to this, he's like, that's my dad.
Yeah, man.
There's certain markers, DNA markers. Your voice is one of them. And he'll hear your voice and he'll repeat and say like you say it.
Yep.
And I think that that's the privilege of the blessing. God has blessed me as well with sons, and having grown up without a dad. Those are the kinds of things that we cherish, whether you've had one or you didn't have one. When you get the opportunity to be one, oh man, you do it over. I'm over the top when it comes to dad.
It's great, man. And what I love about that is dads will tell stories that I'm not going to say only dads understand, but I was talking to Dan Dickerson, who's the Tigers radio play-by-play voice. We were speaking yesterday, and his children are grown.
That's the Detroit Tigers.
Exactly.
For those who might be listening.
Good point. And his son is older now, and he was talking about remembering when he was 2. And he goes, I used to just love to scoop my son up, and we would wrestle, and I would just grab him and throw him around. And looking at his face tell this story, he lit up talking about how awesome it is to just kind of scoop up and embrace your child. Oh, yeah. And I know when you say your kids grow older, but some of those memories stay with you. I love talking to dads about what do you love? And they go, man, I love coming home and hearing the kids go, Daddy's home, Daddy's home.
Or running to you and pick me up.
Yes.
I was teasing my son the other day because his son is 3 years old now. And he comes up to you and he goes, I pick you up. Instead of saying, I want you to pick me up, he goes, I pick you up. And I go, you do, Elijah, you do. You pick me up every time you say that.
That's perfect.
And so I concur with that. Man, we've only got a few minutes left. I'm really thrilled. I mean, you talked about a room lighting up, with a child. I think a room can light up with 2 black men talking about something such as family, such as, having beautiful wives and having grown up beating the odds of statistics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was some media out there about Detroit saying that it was just a bad place and, you know, the 7 Mile area and so forth and so on. And I think that it's time to take the narrative back and share the stories of people who succeeded or who are succeeding coming from that or having ties in that area, in that region, in that community. Grand Rapids is a whole world away, and it's a wonderful town. Give me a parallel for you having lived in Detroit and now living in Grand Rapids for our listening audience, because there's some young people thinking, you know, some strange things.
Ain't nothing new under the sun, you know what I mean? And I think growing up in Detroit, you feel like that's the big city. Yeah. Growing up in Detroit, you feel like, not that the world is here, but everything I could ever want is in Detroit. Then you get to Grand Rapids and see so many parallels. Yeah. And it's like, oh, man, I think the common thread is us, is a we.
Yeah.
You know,
it's the humans.
Yes, human beings are going to be human beings. And so when I got here, there was a gentleman, his name is Slacks Fitzgerald, and he was a former
That's a cool
newspaper.
name.
It's a great name.
He's a writer?
He's a writer.
It fits.
And he reaches out and he invites me to his social club that he gathers at here. And he goes, come on through, you know, we're going to cook up some rabbit. And like he's explaining the Super Bowl menu. And I was like, hold on a second. You cooking rabbit? But it was nothing wrong with what he was saying.
Stewed rabbit.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, that sounds just like some grandparents. That sounds just like some aunts and uncles I got back home. And so I was like, okay, I started to feel a little bit more comfortable in these spaces. But being in Grand Rapids or Muskegon Heights or parts of Detroit, there's so many common threads, and that is the people. Mm-hmm. And it's hardworking folks who take pride in where they live and where they grew up, and they don't abide you speaking bad about where they grew up.
Exactly.
Because like you just said, there's some negative pockets, there's some negative people, but we all made it. Mm-hmm. We're still here.
And there are people making it every day.
Every day. Yeah. Every day.
Yeah, that's the upside.
Yep.
Man, I'm excited about what your future might hold. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, and maybe even 20?
And I had always had this goal, speaking of representation, I wanted to be on ESPN because I thought I want to be what Stuart Scott was for me.
Sure.
I want to be the next generation of kids can say, okay, there's another one of us who's talking the talk, walking the walk, giving back to people and being his genuine self on TV. I would want to be that. Then I found out that ESPN is headquartered in Bristol, Connecticut, and I have to move further away from my friends and family.
Maybe not so much.
After living 14 hours away in Fargo, I'm like, I don't want to live further away.
That's right.
You know, so I would ideally love to move back home to Detroit. As much as I love Grand Rapids, I've still got family. My parents still live in Detroit, and I love for my son to be near his grandparents and his cousins. And I would love to be on television and have this full circle moment of being the same representation that I saw growing up that allows children to know what is exactly possible for them. And that's where I would love to be.
I believe that could happen.
That's exactly where I'd love to be.
I believe it could happen. Man. What about that? That's 5, 10, 20?
That's 10 and 20. You know,
okay,
that's
10 and
20. You
awesome.
know, I just I really want that. But ultimately, I think because I was so blessed to have the family structure I had growing up, I just want that for my son. That I don't care what job I have, as long as my son feels loved and provided for and is surrounded by people who love him.
Sure.
And he like is growing up learning from the people around him. That's what I want.
You talked a little bit about something I want to ask you, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Do you do any mentoring at all? Are you available? Because there's a listening audience, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, or a young person, you know, a girl or boy, that might be interested in reaching out.
I've mentored kids at elementary schools in East Kentwood, or Kentwood rather. I've mentored kids in the Plainview district, or you know, the Northview school district, and definitely in the Muskegon area. And it doesn't matter, you know, ages 5 to 50, honestly. I am kind of there to be a sounding board for people that have questions, not just people who want to get into this business, but people who might just need someone to look at and go, okay, how can you kind of, you know, is there any advice you could have for someone that, you know, my door is always open to being a mentor because I think, as I mentioned about coming through the door and pulling people with you, it's not enough to make it if you're not helping people make it.
Yeah.
It's not enough to be blessed with opportunity if you're not sharing these blessings with other people. And it's not enough to be given a gift if you don't share your gift with other people.
That's right.
And so I feel it's somewhat of a duty to do this. And I'll be honest, this is a full circle moment again. The reason I think that is because my father, I grew up in a household where both of my parents worked 2 jobs, not out of necessity, but out of want, because they wanted us to have more than one job would have paid for. So both of my parents worked 2 jobs, and my father especially worked at HUD He was also the head of the ushers at Shane Park Amphitheater in downtown Detroit.
Wow.
He did
Which
that
is
for
now
20
Aretha Franklin.
Yep, the theater, I think it is. Yeah, but yep. So he did that for 20 years. He also worked every election at the local precinct down the street where Cooley High used to be. He worked so many jobs, but also volunteered his time at the Parade Company, the company that puts on the Detroit Thanksgiving Day Parade.
Yeah.
And he was recently given like their volunteer lifetime achievement award.
Awesome.
Because somehow my father lives by the standard of there's always enough time. There's enough time to work my job, enough time to coach my son's Little League team, enough time to work this extra job, enough time to volunteer to help other people. There is enough time in a day to do these things.
Well, I want to interview him. I
you,
will bring
you
brought him into the room.
You bring Steve Spencer in here.
You brought him into the room.
He'll tell you some things.
That is awesome. Man. That's great
I
philosophy.
genuinely believe that because, again, it's not enough to go to work every day and come home and go to sleep. I understand. That's fine. Yeah. Share your gifts with the world. Share your abilities. Share your knowledge.
Make the world a better place, literally.
Literally. Because we all have the power to do that.
You know, that's gratitude. That it is gratitude. That's the true essence of gratitude. Some people think gratitude is just being grateful, but no, gratitude is when you do something with what you have to make someone else's life better.
Yes.
And I think that you are a good example of that. I think that your father did well, your mom did well in pouring that into you. You did a great shout out to them. Are there any fellow journalists or people in the field that you want to do a shout out to? I know that there's one we know both. We both know.
When I was a student at Michigan State, there was a young black woman who was writing for the Orlando Sentinel. She was from the city of Detroit. She later went on to work at ESPN, both behind the scenes and on camera. Her name is Jamal Hill. And I sent her an email from my Michigan State student email address. You don't know me. I'm just looking for advice. I don't know if I'm in the right career path. I'm doubting myself. Is there any advice you could give me? And within 14 hours, she wrote me back.
Wow.
Long email full of advice. And she never met me until one day in Dallas. I was covering Michigan State in 2015 in the Cotton Bowl against Alabama in the college football playoff, and we shared an elevator ride. And I told her, so real quick, I know you probably get this all the time. You don't know me, but I sent you an email once and you answered it, and I'm forever thankful for that. Thank you for making time for people. And she said, and I always will. And she left, and she went to Mumford, so she's a Detroiter through and through. Went to Michigan State with us.
Great folks went to Mumford,
and she's one of those people who's been unapologetically black in her career.
Sure,
and I love that for her.
And that's Jamal
Hill. Yep, and so she's been great. Mentioned Huel Perkins and Emery King.
Yes.
And so for me, I just wanted to say that there were so many people that came up with me. Young man by the name of Sam Clement, who is now the president of the Michigan Association of Broadcasters.
Wow.
One of the best young journalists that I ever met, but he quit because he couldn't afford it. Because this industry is hard financially. You don't get paid a lot in this field when you're starting, especially. Mm-hmm. He was one of the best journalists I ever met, and he quit because he couldn't afford to feed himself, basically. And he never left the business, and now he's the president of the Michigan Association of Broadcasters.
Wow!
And I look at that and I go, man, like that's God right there, because that guy deserves all the great things. So shout out to Sam.
How can students or educators, influencers get a hold of you so that they can have you come talk to their kids or even share your stories?
Please email me. My email address is very simple. My name is Jamal Spencer, and therefore my email address is Jamal Spencer, Jamal Spencer, Spencer, at WZZM-13. So please shoot me an email, and I promise you I will return your email, and hopefully we can get something set up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I think about people like Beverly Payne in Detroit TV on Channel 2.
Yep.
We took a tour in my high school years, and I said I'd love to tell the news or be on the radio as well.
Like Diane Lewis.
Lewis, and been around a long time.
Yep.
You think about this opportunity as an influencer, and we'll close with this. As an influencer, it's not about the camera and it's not about the microphone as much as it is about the influence.
Yes.
What would you like the listening audience to know as your parting thought for today?
You said something at the beginning of this interview that I thought was profound for people like myself. When you said, I don't enjoy the sound of my own voice.
Right. It feels weird to me.
It does. And I think I don't like watching myself on TV. And I say that to say I'm not in it to be seen. I'm not on TV to say, look at me. And I'm not on TV to point the finger at myself. I want to point the finger at you. And I want to showcase your abilities and your talents and your accomplishments And I think I have this position so that I can take a camera in places that it might not otherwise be.
Absolutely.
And I can go to places that might be otherwise overlooked. And I think that's a blessing. And I just want to always say, if you're an influencer or you aspire to be, make sure you take your influence to places that need it. And you're not just going to the same old places that get enough coverage 24/7, 365. You know, you go to places where your voice needs to be heard or your face needs to be seen, and you tell their stories and you put them on the map, because that's really what it's all about.
Man, you are absolutely barking up my tree, as they would say, because what you make happen for somebody else, God will make happen for you.
100%.
And or as my wife's grandfather used to say, it's just nice to be nice.
That's very true too. Yeah.
Listen, we've had an opportunity to talk to Jamal Spencer from WZZM, but he's also an iconic journalist. I'm looking forward to seeing great things in the future. Your heart is in the right place, and I believe that the work that you're doing is going to make a difference for generations to come. So thank you so much for being a part of Community Voices here on 91.9 FM, the People's Choice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to Community Voices with your host, Tarence Lauchie. Community Voices can be heard every Friday at 12 noon. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest, or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Until next week, let your voice be heard in the community.